record this computer. Okay. Admit all people joining in. It's good. Let's do a gallery. Let's see if we can see everyone. Right. Hi guys. If you're there, just yeah, stay on a mute for now. Me and Julia will go through a few questions, but if you have a question, raise your hand up, and then we can bring you on the screen so you can ask the question directly, and we can share this video later to the Facebook community and all over the social media, so everyone can benefit from this session as well. My name is Peter Piotrowicz from the First Principle, and I've got Julia with me. Julia, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Julia Furley from JFH Law. So I'm a specialist lawyer who deals with dental legal issues.
Perfect. So are you quite busy at the moment, Julia, or not yet?
Sorry, say that again?
Are you quite busy at the moment or not yet?
Well, yeah, we are busy dealing with sort of lots of these sorts of inquiries. So, yes. I mean, lots of people have probably seen me on Facebook a few times recently to trying to answer as many questions as I can, because I know obviously the dental community is really struggling at the moment, probably more than most businesses, and with limited support from the government. So, yeah, there's been lots of inquiries, lots of questions that we've been trying to field and help people with over the last.
Yeah, personally, I don't feel that's just my personal opinion, but obviously as a government, I'm just trying to look at the bigger picture. They're not going to necessarily focus on each individual branch and each individual business. So I understand why there is kind of lack of
yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. The problem is that, I mean, I think every specialist area is obviously suffering at the moment, but
yeah, not
many businesses, unlike obviously hotels and bars are shut down completely, but not many businesses are closed in the same way as dental practices.
No, you're right. Yeah, it's like a limbo, because it's a very hands-on service. But
yeah, I mean, we're struggling.
No one told them to really physically close down. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the question for dental practices is more so what's going to happen once the lockdown finishes, because the risk to dental practices isn't going to change until there's a vaccine or there's a treatment to this virus.
There is a very high risk in terms of, maybe even dentistry being the place where everything restarts again, and which these guys don't want to be that place. So that's why they're looking for answers. And I think the leadership, it's important in this scenario. Obviously they're all looking up to all of the top people out there. They don't necessarily get answers, and that's why we got them here, hopefully, and they will get some of the answers.
Well, I'd certainly do my best.
Yeah, right. So obviously I wanted to share some of the value, obviously the information, and your credibility. Obviously you're more credible in this area than me, that's for sure, because obviously you're dealing with this day in, day out. I'm just learning throughout the process as well, and try to apply that to my own business. So basically, can we talk through a couple of things? You've sent me a couple of questions on the messenger, so you want to run through them first?
Yeah, okay, well let's do that. It's probably the easiest place to start.
Yeah. So the first one, what did we put there as a first question? Let's have a look.
One of the first one I think was a practice manager who is working at a fully private clinic, and she said that the principal has furloughed myself and all other staff from the 1st of April for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
He's then talking about bringing us back individually for 1 week, and each of us working for approximately 12 hours a week. And he doesn't know what he wants us to do in that time, but it will save him money, is his argument. Can he do this 3 weeks furlough on 80% pay, then 1 week on approximately 12 hours pay? This means our weekly contracted hours will be 12 hours instead of 35. Now, excuse me, it's not Corona, don't worry. A lot of there's a lot of questions and a lot of issues within this question. It obviously starts off with the government job retention scheme, so furloughing, which is, for any business, a really, really valuable tool. It needs to be used properly and it needs to be used fairly, but it really is going to allow many businesses to stay in practice in the long run. So it is something that the employees need to have some understanding for the business owners as well, because I appreciate we're all in a difficult situation, but if a business is going to survive, they have to be able to use this scheme. We now know it is possible to bring staff in and out of furlough. So as long as you furlough someone for a minimum of 3 weeks, it's really important to keep an eye on that date. So
Okay.
3 weeks, you can bring people in a furlough, out of furlough, they can come back and do their work, or they can go back onto furlough.
Okay. So if I've got the need today to bring my employee in just to do some work for me,
Yep.
and then put them back in, that's not a problem.
That's not a problem. As long as you've done 3 weeks already, you can then
So
break.
has to be 3 weeks already, and
Furlough
then
needs to be the 3 week period, minimum period, and then you can return to work for an hour. Doesn't matter, an hour or a month, but the furlough element needs to be at least 3 weeks.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, so you've been, let's say, I furloughed my employee for a week now, okay,
Yeah.
or from 1st of April, okay.
Yeah.
So I furloughed him from 1st of April. Can I bring him in, let's say, today to do a couple of hours of work and put him back in? No, it has to be 3 weeks.
It has to be. So that if you did it from the 1st, it would have to be the 21st. So you've done that full 3 weeks, and then you can bring him back for a day. Otherwise, otherwise you've broken the furlough, and the business will need to pay for that money rather than claiming it back from the government. So it's really important that you keep an eye on that.
But if you bring someone back in after this 3 weeks, bring them back in for a day and put them back in the furlough, does that not gonna still affect the way you claim the future money?
Yes, that will break your furlough. So you'll have a 3 week claim, a day of work, which the business will pay 100%. And then they can go back onto furlough after that. But again, you need to make sure it's for 3 weeks at least.
Okay, yeah.
So one thing that we're looking at with lots of dental practices, because reasonably high staff numbers, if the practice isn't closed down completely, but has, is triaging phone calls and keeping deliveries coming in, things like that, what we're suggesting is do a rota, get everyone to do a fair share of work, a fair share of furlough, but keep an eye on the fact that the furlough scheme at the moment is just from the 1st of March to the 31st of May. So you need to be really careful that you don't furlough someone at the end of May and end up having to pay the business having to pay them rather than being able to claim for the scheme because they haven't got a full 3 weeks of furlough. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. Julia, question here for you, because I've got people dropping questions in a group chat.
Okay.
If you guys want to join in and have a one-to-one session as well, feel free to just raise your hand and I can bring you on the screen. But we've got a question here about an associate who doesn't want to be redeployed because she's got a medical condition, but then she does not want to, she or he does not want to be doing any kind of phone triaging, any kind of work. Do they get paid or not?
Well, it's yes, because, well, no, if you're not going to do any work, then you don't get paid. This is slightly different because obviously we've moved away from furlough and presumably we've now moved on to NHS.
Yeah, well, it's NHS, yes, and associate as well. So it's kind of, guys, this type of questions are very tricky.
Can we just finish the furlough? Just a couple more points on the furlough. And then we will talk about the NHS redeployment as well. Because what I wanted to say about furlough is that, because what the practice managers asked in this question is, can my boss make me do this? Can he enforce this? It is furlough is a contractual change, reduction in hours is a contractual change. So if the staff member does not agree to it, does not agree to go on furlough, does not agree to the reduction in hours, then no, the business owner cannot force you to do it. So, of course, you need to bear in mind that if you don't agree,
what's the alternative to it?
Exactly. So, but if you've been working in a business for particularly over 2 years, then you obviously have employment law rights. So it may well be that your employer will need to go through the whole redundancy process. So keep an eye on what you do and don't agree to. And what I'm saying to business practice owners is just have these discussions with your staff. Explain to them what it is that you're trying to achieve, why you need them to do what you need them to do, and reach an agreement. But when that agreement is reached, remember it is a contractual change. So it needs to be in writing, it needs to be very clearly agreed, and it needs to be signed off by both practice owner and by the staff member. So for this practice, I'm a bit confused as to why this practice would want to bring all the staff back for just 12 hours a week intermittently, why not just furlough a lot of them and keep, for example, one member of staff on full-time pay throughout the whole period to do the triaging of phone calls and things.
I think that would be difficult, obviously, because you will always get someone saying, well, why do they get full pay and they get stay? Why is it that one person? It's kind of difficult to prove.
But don't forget, it doesn't matter. I mean, as much as I'd like to make everyone happy, if you ask someone to stay in the business and work full time, they're just doing their job. That's not optional. I know lots of people are not enjoying the furlough because this isn't enjoyable for anyone. But lots of people are seeing, well, furloughs is quite a nice thing because I get 80% of my income, or up to the 2,500 a month, and I get to stay at home with my family away from the risk. And of course, that's optimal.
Yeah, well, personally, I'm very grateful for the support we all receive, but I always think forward, and someone has to pay for all of this in the future. This is not free money. It's not going to drop from the sky. Someone has to pay for it, and the only way I can see this being paid back is in taxation. It will be other things that we're not going to enjoy, guys. So I think it should be used wisely.
Yeah, this is exactly right. But I think with this specific question, people who say, well, I don't want to carry on working full time, I want to be on furlough, frankly, tough. If you don't want to work and you're not being offered furlough, then your option is to resign. And that's it. So I think people just need to be a little bit realistic about what their rights are during this period. And just
the bottom line is, as an employer, you can't choose to offer them furlough.
Yes,
you're not obliged to do that.
You're not obliged to.
Okay.
Exactly.
Then once you offer them, they can choose to opt into that option, but they can say, I don't want it, and I want to leave. But that's the other option they have, really. So there's no one is forcing anyone in this situation. No. Obviously, this is designed to help, but people need to realize if the employer is giving you something, you should you've got two options: take it or leave it.
Exactly. And this is about negotiation and everyone helping everyone. As you say, understanding that we are going to have to pay this back at some point. It's not free money. So everyone has. But
for example, if you get an employee saying, I don't want to work, I want you to follow me. Well, if you want them to work, then there's no obligation on you to say you have to, you have to follow them. Okay.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah, because I've seen that happening as well. People asking because I've seen a lot on social media. It's quite visible who doesn't want to necessarily work. And I'm not talking about specific Facebook groups. It's generally on Facebook. You can see people treating this as a holiday, and it's not. It's a difficult situation for everyone, so it's there to help. So that's great.
Okay. Now that we were just about to talk about the NHS issue.
Yes.
And remind me of that question again. Then, so they had an associate that didn't want to be deployed.
Yeah. So the associate doesn't want to be redeployed. They got medical condition, and she does not want to do any kind of triaging or the phone work. Nothing.
Again, I think that's the reality is if everyone would have seen from the Chief Dental Officer's guidance published last week, it is quite stark, the options that are available for the dental team. At the moment, it is the offer by the NHS and the government within the job retention scheme. The government is quite clear that they do not expect people to be using, for example, the job retention scheme or other government funding where businesses are funded by public bodies such as the NHS. So people who are working within NHS dental practices are expected to carry on working during this time and are expected to redeploy during this time. Now, an associate who says, well, I don't want to work at all, I don't think is going to wash, because what that guidance is saying is that there are non-patient facing roles that people are able to do, such as manning 111, which would not put them in risk of contact with COVID and what have you. So an associate saying, I want to carry on being paid, but I don't want to do anything, is unlikely to be eligible for payment under the NHS contract. So I think, again, they need to be quite realistic about how this is going to go. If, however, they are shielding...
Can I just drop into that? Because obviously I'm pretty sure you covered that, but obviously that communication saying I don't want to do any work should not happen via WhatsApp or Facebook. It should be in writing, because that tends to happen. The communications within the dental practices teams usually is through some random channels like Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, which I personally hate WhatsApp, but anyway, it's lots of that happening. And then how do you prove and then people have screenshots of messages and everything goes wrong. So obviously I would encourage everyone, if you got this difficult talks to do and things like that, document it in writing.
Absolutely. Have the discussion and then write it down and get everyone to sign it off. What is unclear at the moment from the CDO and the NHS offer is what happens if I, as a dental practice owner, want to continue working at 100% capacity, keep all of my staff. I've kept all my employees on, but my associates who are self-employed contractors say, no, I'm not interested in doing this. What happens to the NHS payment in those circumstances? Do they get a proportion of the NHS payment for what they are able to deploy, or do they get nothing because they're not effectively keeping all of the staff on? That's unclear at the moment. There isn't any guidance, and I can't speculate at the moment because I haven't heard of any examples where the local commissioning team have said, well, actually, no, if you don't give up all of your staff and all of your associates to the fight against COVID, then you won't be eligible for anything. So I think,
again, you're right. I mean, there's no clear cut on that, but again, there's something I've come across as well. Again, as a practice, you can't make anyone to do voluntary work.
Can't.
So that's the bottom line. You can't force physically anyone to do anything. So what you're saying to NHS is that you make them available. But if they choose to be redeployed, if you contact them and say, we need you to be redeployed, I need to refuse. That's the individual conversation they will have with them, not you as a practice owner. And then obviously the consequences of that might come back to you, and you'll have to recalculate.
I think the consequences of that are likely to be that NHS payments will be reduced accordingly, because if that person isn't being redeployed, then they won't be entitled to payment under the contract.
So then you'll have obviously recalculation for that specific individual who.
But I don't know how they're going to calculate that value, if you like. So
it will take us 20 years to get there.
What we have been advising, and particularly mixed practices, because of course mixed practices are more complicated than other practices, is, as we now know that you are able to furlough the proportion of your available private staff, what we have been suggesting is, firstly, again, do a rota. So for all your employed staff, do a rota. Who is going to be available for redeployment? What percentage of staff do you actually need to offer up? Firstly, look at the people who are vulnerable, because employers have a health and safety obligation. So it would not be necessarily appropriate for you to redeploy or offer a member of staff up for redeployment who is either vulnerable or is shielding a vulnerable person. So take them out of the equation. Then look at who is going to volunteer, because lots of people are actively volunteering to help. So that's wonderful, and you can put them into your sort of calculation. And then rota people on and off. So if you've got more people, if you've got enough volunteers, then furlough them for a period, put them in for redeployment for a period, and so on. Just keep an eye on making sure that everyone has a fair exposure to redeployment, as opposed to one person having to furlough and one person having to be redeployed. I've just seen a question pop up on my screen about it being voluntary. I don't believe that, because the guidance that was issued last week by the CDO was that it was guidance for those who volunteer and for those who are redeployed. So although the word voluntary is used a lot in that document, it is entirely unclear how voluntary that actually is. So it may well be that it is voluntary in the sense that they wouldn't enforce it by like taking you to court to enforce the contract, but it would mean that if you don't do it, you're not going to get paid. So how voluntary is that really in practical terms? So, I mean, look for volunteers and then have that sort of discussion about how you can get people out. But what I have been doing is writing to local commission team, local area teams, and saying, I'm happy on behalf of practice, obviously, we are happy to redeploy this percentage of our practice. It reflects the same percentage as the NHS turnover, excuse me. And however, these people have restrictions. For example, this person's caring for a vulnerable person and therefore would not be able to redeploy to a frontline position. So making it absolutely clear that you're being as cooperative and meeting the sort of letter, the terms of the offer, but there are limitations to what you can ask your team to undertake. The next stage, of course, is that similar to furloughing, if you are going to redeploy staff members and if you are going to redeploy associates, these are contractual changes. And in particular for the associates, you need to make sure that you are effectively moving them away from the contract that they've got with the practice and making it quite clear that any work that they are doing on their own behalf with the NHS. So you are not deploying them. They, as a self-employed contractor who wants to receive NHS funds, you're simply the conduit to get the NHS funds through, but they remain a self-employed contractor and that they are responsible for the work that they do during that period. Employees are different, so your nurses and admin staff who are being redeployed, this also requires a contractual change, but you need to make it clear because you're going to be responsible for them. When they go out to the front line or what have you, they remain your employee, not an NHS employee. So it's important that you set out the ambits of what they can and can't do, what they should do in the event that they're being asked to undertake work that they are not capable or competent to do, who they should speak to, what they should do in those circumstances, and also make it clear in writing the extent of the work that they might be asked to do. So what I've been doing is taking the document created by the NHS, so the guidance document, and appending that to contractual changes and saying, you agree that you have read the attached document and that you consent to be being redeployed potentially in any of these scenarios, in any of these circumstances, so that the staff are signing that they agree to do this. So there's not going to be any comeback on you in, however long time. Let's say they end up in the Nightingale contracting COVID-19, being very unwell and coming back to their employer and saying, well, why did you put me in this circumstance?
I thought there is something about, there was a COVID bill that protects employers and protects, at least protects their healthcare professionals, undertrained healthcare professionals.
Exactly.
Deployed,
the COVID bill protects against medical negligence claims. So any dentist or nurse who's put into, dental care professional who's put into frontline does not need to fear for professional negligence or clinical negligence claims against them. They can't do that. But what I'm saying is, as an employer, you have an obligation towards your employees. So it's the employer's liability that you need to be concerned about. So employers need to make sure that they're
you're absolutely right. Is they need to cover their own back, basically. That's what we're trying to say.
And it's cynical, I know, but people are being asked to do things that are well outside their normal contractual obligations. So it's essential that they understand it, they agree to it, and it's written clearly down and everyone's signed it off. So just to make sure that that's all covered. So you do need to make these contractual changes.
Right. There was some questions about holidays. Let's try to bring someone up on the screen. I think we had quite a lot of questions from Andrew Lee. Andrew, you want to unmute your microphone and put your camera on so we can talk to you? Are you there, Andrew?
Hi.
Hi, Andrew.
Hello.
Yeah, we can see you and hear you now.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, I'd got sort of question because the CDO was talking about splitting your income by percentage. That's the way in which NHS reimbursements have worked in the past. but HMRC talk about declaring certain staff as furlough, and to get that percentage to work, we'd have to divide people in half. It might be that we simply don't know enough at the moment, and we wait to see how it goes. But I can see for us, we're potentially either over furloughing or under furloughing if we've got to do it in terms of whole people.
It's a new, because it's a new scheme. No one really knows how it's going to work. What we've been suggesting is to do it in the percentage of private to NHS, just because it's the easiest calculation.
Yeah.
But that's where the rota system comes in handy.
Yeah.
So people can, you don't necessarily furlough someone for the entire 3 months. They come in, they come out, so that you get that balance right. And it is a little bit of a balance.
Yes.
But you know, I don't know whether the NHS or HMRC is really going to come looking at your percentages in weeks or months to come, but I can't guarantee that there's not going to be some sort of audit and you're unlucky enough to go one way or the other. But I think that's what some practices we've been advising have got a sort of odd mix of, let's say, 37% NHS, you know, so we have had to take it down to a schedule of bringing people on, bringing people off, and erring on the side of caution. So if it is sort of 35% one way, 65 the other, we've kind of topped it off with 40-60, just to go in favour of the NHS, so they can't be too much of a risk that there's going to be reclaiming later in the day.
Yeah. But
yeah, and we are all kind of working in the dark here, because when they put this offer out, I don't think they thought about, it's obviously good intentions to get people working and keep funding the practices, but I don't think they thought about the legal practicalities, all this sort of accounting practicalities of it.
Julia, question for you. Like, from this perspective, like, you might have 50% of staff you want to put on furlough, 50% government funding, like the NHS funding. Now, how do you make that decision? And I kind of keep going back to my risk-based approach, where you think, you know, if they have to, like, on the NHS, they have to be redeployed, or they have to be ready to be redeployed. So it's fair to say, if you go by risk-based approach and determine which staff members are higher risk of contracting COVID, then you furlough them. If they're in lower risk of contracting COVID, then can potentially be redeployed, therefore they can go on the NHS. It's fair that's in my head at the moment, is this is the most fair way of doing this thing, rather than I like you more than this one.
Oh no, you need to be really careful, because what you don't want is discrimination allegations. So you really need to be able to justify the decisions that you make, but it is going to be easy to justify. If you've got a nurse in their 70s versus a nurse in their 20s, you're not going to have an age discrimination claim at the end of this, because you can easily justify why the 72-year-old's being furloughed rather than the 25-year-old. So but you just need to think it through, write it down, and make sure you make a really clear plan as to why you're doing what you're doing and how you're achieving it.
Okay. And we've got one more question from Andrew. Yeah.
Hi. We have an associate who was instructed, because of their medical situation, to self-isolate for 12 weeks.
Right.
And we're looking at whether they are eligible for the NHS long-term sick pay on that. The BDA feel that they probably would be. I was just wondering whether you'd had any.
I haven't had any queries. No, I haven't had anything on this. I would hope that they would, bearing in mind that the government's saying that you would be eligible for statutory sick pay.
That's what they were trying to work on.
So it is equivalent, and you should be able to argue. I think that you've got a very strong argument that they should be paid the sick pay under the contract.
Thanks.
Any other questions, guys? Raise your hand up, or just unmute your microphone so we can take the face-to-face question, rather than me trying to read through quite a lot of comments here. So if you do have a question, just put down. Amit, come on, unmute your microphone. We can't hear you very well, Amit.
I'm sorry, I still can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Amit. The microphone is muted, but
Okay. Can you hear me now?
yeah, that's better.
So I was going to say, based on 100% pay, if we pay our staff and then retrospectively the NHS has to claw back the money, is there any way of getting that money back from the employee? Otherwise, the alternative would be to make them redundant.
I'm sorry.
I think I know what the question is. I think I know. Your microphone is not not close enough. I mean, but I think I know what the question is. So if you pay your staff 100%, and then NHS come back after you and say, I want that money back from some of your employees or from you, so you have to pay it back to NHS. Can you claw that money back? Is there a way of clawing that money back from your employees? So yeah.
Sorry, just so I'm understanding. So if you've paid them 100% of their salary on the basis that you understood the NHS contract would pay out.
Yes.
And then the NHS contract have said they're not going to pay out. Can you, against your employed staff, you would really struggle to get that, to claw money back from employed staff. Once you've paid money to staff, they've made themselves available. The fact that the contract didn't pay out is unlikely to give you any protection at all. So no, in the sense of associates, very probably you would be able to claim it back. But this is why I'm saying make sure that you have contractual amendments, written contractual amendments in place with your associates. Because one of the things that we've put in is that they will indemnify the practice if for any reason the NHS doesn't pay out. Then the person, the associate that has been paid that money, would be obliged to pay that back to the practice. So it is important to make sure that you get this in writing first, so you can claw that money back from them in due course. But for employees, no, it's a risk that you'd have to take. But the thing is, I think if you met all the requirements that the NHS ask you to meet and they don't pay out for any reason, then you might have a legal case against the NHS. So not that you want to go down the sort of fighting with everyone, but I think you'd be reasonably protected if you've done everything that you've been asked to do, and then for some obscure reason they didn't pay out, then you'd probably have a good claim against them as well.
Right, good. So we've got a question from Petros. Let's put Petros on now. So
yes, hello.
Morning.
My video up. Okay, can you see me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. My question is, of staff who are on maternity, and the question is, when and how do I, or am I able to follow them?
Yes, you are. You're able to furlough pregnant staff now. So if they're not officially on maternity leave, then you can furlough them up until that point. That's been put out in the government guidance. Mm-hmm. However, as soon as they were due to go on maternity leave, then they must go on to maternity pay. So if you're on, you can't be furloughed whilst you're on maternity leave effectively. Now, they might choose to take a shortened maternity leave on the basis that they can then go on to furlough, but I wouldn't advise them to do that because we don't know how long the furlough system is going to last. Yes. So they may find that they drop off furlough very quickly and you can't go back onto maternity leave in that way. So the advice is furlough until they are officially sort of giving birth, or the week before they're going to give birth. As soon as they give birth, put them onto maternity leave and maternity pay in the normal way, and they'll be paid 90% of their normal salary rather than 90% of their furloughed salary. Leave them on maternity leave until they intended to come back. And if for some reason that we're still in the furlough situation at that point, when they were due to come back from maternity leave, you can put them back onto furlough.
Right. So okay. in my case, this COVID-19 crisis happened when they were already on maternity leave.
Okay. So when does their maternity leave end?
It's kind of staggers from a period starting end of August to December this year.
Okay. Well, your staff members should stay on their maternity leave and not be furloughed until they notify you that they want to return to work, and what in the normal way, as they normally would, giving you, I can't remember what notice they've got to give you, but giving you the right notice.
I think it's something like 8 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah, is it 8 weeks? Gosh. Once they've, so my brain's gone blank. But once they've given you that notice, then you can make the decision. If you don't need them to come back and the furlough scheme is still ongoing, you can put them onto furlough as soon as their maternity leave ends. But
Right.
don't put them onto furlough until the maternity leave ends.
And my last question in regards to that is, putting them onto furlough effectively means registering with HMRC for this furlough scheme.
Yes.
But there's nothing to stop me from having discussions with them so they can understand what's going on.
100%. And I fully encourage that. Make sure, have a dialogue with them, work. I mean, it may well be by the time they're coming off of maternity leave that the furlough scheme has ended, in which case this will become academic. But have an open discussion with them, document the conversations that you have, so that it's clear you've had the conversation, but do start talking about it sooner rather than later, so that you can work out what the most cost-effective way of bringing them back for the business is, but also for them, because they may find that, you know, there simply won't be a position for them when they come back. So, you know, and lots of people would, I hope, agree to furlough so that they can secure their place moving forward. But they're not, once they've finished maternity leave, they're not in some sort of special category where they can't be furloughed. They can be furloughed.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Okay.
That's great. Does that answer the question? That's good. Holiday pay. So how do we pay people holiday during a furlough?
Holiday has been a really thorny issue because, again, I don't think they really thought through how holiday can combine with furlough. And there's lots of case law, which I won't bore you with now, about when you can enforce or ask employees to take holiday. Few headline issues. Number one, holiday does accrue whilst team members are on furlough. So even though they're not working and they're at home, they are continuing to accrue their holiday entitlement. Two, what we thought, because of course, when I was speaking earlier on about having 3 weeks minimum of furlough, HMRC confirmed in a tweet last week that bank holidays do not break furlough. So we know that, for example, over the bank holiday weekend, employment lawyers were quite concerned that anyone who'd been put onto furlough in April or the end of March, those 2 days would either break the furlough or you would have to give them the bank holidays at a later date. And that's not the case. But when it comes to bank holidays, the furlough will continue. You will claim the 80% of the, under the scheme up until Good Friday, in which case you, the business, has to pay the staff member 100%. And then the Monday, the business has to pay the staff member 100%. And then they go back onto furlough as of today. So you put the 80%. Now I've asked HMRC for clarification as to, well, can I still claim that 80% back for those bank holiday days? And their answer was, we don't know yet, which I'm not sure. So I think at the moment, err on the side of caution and pay them 100% of their normal salary from the business on those days. But keep an eye out for updates, because we will keep posting updates as and when we get them and when they confirm what the actual position is. And hopefully it would be helpful if they would agree that 80%, at least 80% of that bank holiday pay could be claimed back to the furlough scheme and you could top it up. But again, I don't know if that's going to be the case. But it doesn't break furlough. But you can continue to accrue holiday during furlough. One question I have all the time is, can I ask staff members to take holiday during furlough? Again, this has been a huge debate about this, and the answer at the moment is yes, you can. There is a right, a legislative right, that employers can ask or make employees take holiday, but they have to give 2 days notice for every day's holiday that's going to be taken. So if someone's going to take a week's holiday, you've got to give them 2 weeks notice of when that holiday is going to be taken.
But that surely will be 100% paid then to that employee.
It will, and exactly. And when they're on holiday, they'll be paid 100%. You cannot furlough that. So it's an expense to the business, but some people are working on the basis that, well, it's better for me to just take that hit now rather than waiting till everyone comes back. They've accrued however many months of holiday during furlough, and then they all come back and want to go on holiday because it's been a bit stressful. So there is that. You also, particularly for NHS practices who have people who are not on furlough but are on, being paid 100% and waiting to be deployed. So they might be sitting at home on 100% of their salary waiting for deployment. You could ask them to take some holiday during this period. There's nothing in the rules I've seen so far, and again, I'll update it if anything changes, that says you couldn't ask them to take their holiday during this period, and it would be paid in the normal way. Don't, however, try to game the system and get them all on holiday all the time, because then, of course, they're not available for redeployment. So you can sort of reach a balance. What I do think is probably the best thing to do, though, is have a sort of agreement with staff where they are taking the same percentage of holiday as they are furloughed, for example, so that they don't get to the point where they reach the end of this period, we all come out of lockdown and no one's got any holiday entitlement left, because you're going to end up with a very unhappy workforce who are very tired and very stressed. So again, I think it's a sort of a negotiation, reach a balance between what people want and what the business needs.
Okay.
And always write this down.
Okay. I think we've got one more question here. So let's unmute. It's Bharat, yes? Hello, sir.
Hi. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Julia, just wanted to ask a question regarding the associates again. The associates pay that they're going to be receiving. You said that we should somehow get something in writing in case there's any changes with the NHS and they claw back. Would that be down as an amendment to the contract? Or because our contracts sort of state that any amendments we want to make, we've got to give them notice of any amendments as well. Mm-hmm. How would it work?
You would need to, if it's an amendment, of course, they would need to agree to the amendment. So I don't know is it just a standard BDA contract that you've got?
Yes.
And what's the notice that you've got to give them? It's just notice in writing, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's it. If you're any contract amendment with either your staff or with the associates, you have to have their agreement on. What we are finding is that most associates are once they've agreed to redeployment anyway, they're agreeing to these contract changes because they need to get paid. So, and I'm not talking about really unfair contract changes, but just changes that protect both the practice and the associate, and just make it absolutely clear that what they are doing is voluntary, is their choice, and you're not making them do it. Because as soon as you're exercising that sort of control over them and telling them they've got to be redeployed, then they start moving away from being self-employed contractors and they start moving towards being employees or workers, which you, as a practice owner, you don't want. So it's just really about protecting your position and making sure that everything is clear about what they're expected to do, that it's their choice that they're doing it, that any negotiations about where they're deployed to will be made between the associate and the NHS. It's got nothing to do with you. And that if the NHS fail for any reason, or that you will only pay them for and presumably it'll be on the basis of the UDA agreement that you've got within the number of UDAs that you agree within your contract, that you will only pay them once you have been paid by the NHS. So it's, so you're not giving anything over. And if there is a clawback from the NHS because of anything that dentist does, then you will be able to claw it back from that dentist.
Because obviously the situation now is a little bit weird because
that's an understatement.
The UDAs that you're obviously contracting or you're sort of saying that they're going to agree to, we don't know how it's going to work when we do go back to work. We're obviously not going to be working at the pace that we were working.
No.
That seems pretty obvious. But obviously we've not given any guidance as to how it's even going to be when we go back to work, in a sense. So it's kind of very much in the air. How do you cover those aspects of the contract? I mean, would you say?
Yeah, don't think too far ahead in many respects. This is make it clear, this is a temporary contract amendment during any period of deployment, and that is it.
Okay.
So don't try and look into the future. Don't try and change your contractual relationship with them for once we are able to go back to work. Just stick with the period. For the period of deployment, this is the agreement between the parties. Right.
Okay. Is there like a template or anything that is out there, or kind of, is there any way of?
There are a lot. I mean, I'm obviously drafting contracts with people, but there is a limit to my generosity, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, guys, Facebook groups are great for getting templates out of them, and we try our best, including myself. We released a lot of free templates and lots of free information. And if it's available, then download it. Feel free to use it. But obviously, but there is a limit, and I really appreciate, Julia, your time. So we're gonna wrap it up now. Final questions, guys. If you have any final questions, raise your hand up. Okay, I've got someone there. Let's unmute your microphone. Hello.
Hi, I just had one question regarding associates. I know we are waiting for them to be redeployed, but what happens in a scenario like this, because obviously they're self-employed and they get the earnings based on what they do per day by UDA or whatever. Now, I have had a case where obviously a self-associate is not able to triage for whatever reasons. Where do we stand in paying them in April? Because they haven't either been redeployed and they are not doing what they should be doing.
Well, have they volunteered for redeployment, or are they simply saying I can't be deployed?
Yes, they have, but one hasn't because of some family reasons. They are with a vulnerable person.
Well, the one that has volunteered for deployment technically should be getting their, whatever their UDA, their normal monthly UDA numbers are. They should be being paid under the contract. If you've been paid under the contract for what they would have done, the very act of making themselves available should be sufficient for them to be paid.
But if they say they are not happy to triage, and if they are not coming,
in the sense that they're not willing to answer questions for your own patients.
Yeah, where do we stand then?
Yeah, well, I think that this is one of the reasons why having a contract amendment is quite important, because if you're expecting them for part of that payment to be triaging their own patients, which I think is entirely reasonable, and I think is what is expected by the NHS, then you should be saying to them that this is the terms of your payment, this is what we're going to offer you, and if you're not willing to do anything, what's the problem with triaging? I don't understand why they won't do anything.
They are not like, it's a funny one. Yeah.
Okay. Well, don't worry about that. Okay. Well, I would be saying contract amendment. This is what we require of you in order to receive these payments. This is what the expectation is from the NHS, and it is that dentists will continue to triage and have contact with their patients over the phone. If you don't do that, then you don't get paid. You're in breach. You're in breach of contract. And if they really aren't going to do anything, then you may want to consider saying to them, well, we have no choice but to terminate your contract, because we need you to be doing what you're obliged to do.
Right. And what does it stands for the apprentices? Because I have a couple of apprentices who are literally on the verge of finishing. I have understood that apprentices do not come under the furlough scheme. So those who are apprentices, we can't take the
no, there's a specific guidance for apprentice. If they're on an apprenticeship contract, there's a specific guidance for them. It is, I'm trying to remember all the details of it, but basically they are able to carry on doing their training. They're not able to go, because often obviously they're on minimum wage, they're not able to go below minimum wage, I think if my recollection is true. But I think if you go onto the government scheme, there's an actual link that takes you through to the apprentices scheme, and it gives quite a lot of guidance about what you can and can't do for your apprentices. But yeah, they are treated differently than normal.
And we can't follow them, that's for sure.
I think you can furlough them, but you have to. They can continue to do their training, the training element, whilst furloughed. Right. And there's a different way in which they're going to be paid, so that they can go below minimum wage.
Okay, no, yeah, that's fine. Thank you so much. You're of great help.
No worries.
Thank you so
Right,
much.
so that's fine. No worries. I enjoy the rest of the day, guys. Let's just wrap it up now, because obviously we said it was going to be half an hour. It's been 45 minutes. I really respect Julia's time and your time, guys. Obviously, you might have something more important to do after this. So what I will do is, probably once I've got this video, I'll post it in a Facebook group and drop all of the useful links I can think of. And if there is anything, Julia, that you can share directly on your website, any useful blogs people can read, and then obviously how they can reach out to you directly. So if they need support from you, let's be clear, it might not be free support, guys. We're doing this for free. This webinar is free, but obviously direct discussions with Julia might acquire some costs to that. But I'll leave that between you and Julia. Yeah, I think that's let's just finish on that note. I mean, hopefully that was useful, guys. We can't answer all of the questions, so I would love to be able to. I've got 1,000 questions in my head as well, as an employer myself. But hopefully that was useful. And if you need any support, keep going back to the Facebook community. Julia is there, and then, you know, people always ask me, who do you recommend for the X, Y, and Z? And it's like, you know, people who appear with me on a screen and talk to me and willing to give so much knowledge away for free. That's the people I recommend. So I wouldn't recommend anyone else. If you do need legal support, talk to Julia, basically. That's what I'm trying to say here. And if you need any help with health and safety, talk to me, by the way. But that's that. Anything you wanted to add, Julia, to this?
No, that's it. I think the one takeaway I want you all to really think about is get everything in writing. Make sure you chart and make a record of every decision that you make, just in case there are questions further down the line, so that you can justify things. And you know, if there is government guidelines that you are following, it changes all the time. Take a screenshot or a photo of that government guideline, so that you can say, on that day when I made that decision, this was what the guidance was, even if it changes in weeks or so to come.
What do you think what's going to happen, obviously, with this furlough thing, especially looking at the furlough scheme? Basically, it lasts for 3 weeks, so you have to furlough someone for 3 weeks. To me, it's a very good indication that that's not going to go away anytime soon, in terms of, you know, the COVID-19 won't go away anytime soon. Or at least, you know, we will get at least 3 weeks notice, because they were saying we're stopping our payment because we're thinking we'll be out of it soon. Like,
yeah,
so I think
just keep an eye on the 31st of May, because you don't want to be, as I say, you don't want to be missing that deadline where you furlough people too late and they won't be eligible. But I expect there will be an extension from the 31st of May, because businesses just won't be ready to come back in the same way as they were before that. But watch this space. Yeah, and what about the readjustments? Obviously, dentistry, like you said, it's a weird one, because it's very hands-on and exposure to aerosol. I think, you know, from the beginning when I was hearing this guidance, or do only aerosol, you know, minimize aerosol generation and only do treatments that don't involve any aerosols. Like, you can't, in dentistry, you can't avoid aerosols. You can minimize, but you can't avoid completely cut them out. So, you know, I think it's going to be very strange going back to work for you guys. That's my personal opinion, because I'm not a dentist, never pretended to be one, but I think it's going to be very strange to go back to work. I think we've got someone asking questions. Are you prepared to take one more question? Yeah, go on then, quick one.
Okay, I'll put you back on, but that's it. Last final question. Hello.
Hi there. Hi Peter. Hi Julie.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, go on.
I just had a quick
final question, because we were just finishing off, but last final
question.
Sorry,
I appreciate this.
That's all right. No worries.
Just regarding the furlough scheme, Julie, I know you've been bombarded with this. As we're obviously nearing the end of the month, if we already furloughed staff, regarding the payments in terms of what we're going to be making to them, is it acceptable to ask our staff that they will not be paid until the actual retention scheme pays the practice?
You can ask them. Again, it's all about having their agreement. That would be a contractual change, so you would need to get them to agree to that. So if you don't have the cash flow to pay them, but you explain that once the system is up and running, you will be able to claim that money back. But it really would be a matter for them to agree. And if you don't pay them and they don't agree that, then they would have a an unlawful deduction from wages claim against you now, whether they stayed in the business or not. So you do need to get them to agree to that.
Okay. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
So, well, the bottom line is, if you can pay, if you can't, then have a discussion. But yeah, it's a difficult time for everyone. But right, so let's finish off. Thank you very much, guys, for joining in today. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, drop the comment under the video when I post it in a group, and yeah, keep having good discussions. Try to provide, if you're sharing any good advice, guys, in a Facebook group. So I know, coming from Julia, we know it's kind of 100% right. She will do the research. She wouldn't put her reputation on the line because she will try to share everything spot on. And the same me, I always try to research first. But when you're sharing something, so we've had misinformation as well. And to me, it's important that the Facebook community that I run has accurate information. So please, 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 if you're sharing something that you might trigger some actions on the back of it, please share some links to credible sources rather than a Sun website, I think, or the newspaper's website, because they're not always right. So it's important that, during this pandemic, I've done a training actually myself on WHO website. If you want to go and do that yourself as well, it takes about 2 hours. But it's how to manage pandemic and all sorts of settings, and it's more of a how to spread the correct information, how to discredit the incorrect information and all that. So watch that, and you will see why the government is saying certain things a certain way, like stay home, protect the NHS. They're repeating the same message because they want to avoid misinformation going out, because the minute they say we are thinking about relaxing the rules, people will be out on the streets, and that's what they're trying to avoid. So please, before you share something that relates and will have effect on how you might run a business and someone else might run your business, please research it and then share and say this is from the government, this is from the official sources, rather than even including my website. I mean, I'll share as much as I can, but I would not put anything specific on COVID and advice, because I don't feel like I'm the person to advise anyone on a COVID. I'm just here to facilitate this discussion with qualified people. And if I can contribute, I will ask and tell you this is my personal opinion rather than gospel, and you should go by that. So I don't want to try to steer anyone into specific way of thinking. So, but that's me done for today. Thank you very much, Julia, for joining. Guys, thank you for joining as well.
Take care, everyone.
And stay safe, stay at home, don't go anywhere, protect your NHS or our NHS. And what else? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. and hopefully we're going to come out of it much stronger. Learn the lesson now, because when we come out of it, there will be time where we can all benefit from all of that in a positive way rather than negative. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Stay safe. Bye.